Okay. Hi, so it's about 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is BIN318, Report Authoring for Information Workers. My name is Chris Baldwin. I'm a program manager on the reporting services team, SQL Server. I've been with the team with Microsoft for about a year and a half. The things I kind of focus the most on are Office integration with reporting services, as well as all of the rendering extensions that you use to generate your reports to various different formats. So throughout the course of the talk today, we're going to be talking a lot about some of the things that the reporting services team is doing to make using reporting services a lot easier for people who may not be expert report authors and who aren't developers. So extending the reach of reporting services through software such as Microsoft Office and SharePoint. So here's the agenda for the talk, and we'll start out talking about some things, some Office integration kind of areas that are available today in SQL Server 2005 reporting services that you may already be using, as well as some integration points that really came out quite recently with the release of Service Pack 2 of 2005. After that, we'll talk about some things that are going to be in the next version of reporting services in SQL Server 2008, some features that you can look forward to. Then we'll take a deep dive into Office Writer technology. So Office Writer is an acquisition that Microsoft has performed. It was announced early last month at the BI conference in Seattle, and it was a product line from a company called Soft Artisans. And what Office Writer does is it lets you basically your whole report authoring experience begins and ends in Office. So it really brings kind of the power of the platform into Office users. We'll take a deep dive into that, and we'll look at kind of a few different scenarios that it enables. We'll do some detailed demos of building reports under various different scenarios. We'll take a look at the architecture and see how it works. And finally, we will look at the kind of roadmap down the line and look at the timeline that you could start to expect this kind of functionality as part of SQL Server. So this is the Microsoft integrated BI offering. And if you've been to any BI talks, you've probably seen this slide a million times. So the lower level kind of represents data from any data source being used with SQL Server, integrated in through the database management system, analyzed, processed, and reported on by reporting services. The next two levels really represent bringing that data out to users. So the middle level there is Excel and Office tools, Performance Point Server, tools that end users would use to connect to the BI platform to explore their data and ask interesting questions of it. And finally, the top level is SharePoint Server, which is responsible a lot for surfacing that data and allowing people to have access to it. Reporting Services is committed to doing a lot of work in the top two layers to make the experience of information workers accessing SQL Server a lot easier and a lot more seamless into their daily kind of business tasks. So Office integration today in SQL Server 2005 reporting services. Some things you may be using already and some things maybe not. SharePoint integration is something that came out in Service Pack 2 of SQL Server 2005, so fairly recently. What that does is it allows you to integrate a SharePoint server with a report server so that you basically perform all of your reporting tasks through SharePoint. What you might have otherwise known as Report Manager, which was a UI for doing management and accessing reports and exporting reports and exploring reports, you can all now do that through SharePoint. And you can integrate all of those reports into your company's portal rather seamlessly. Something that's been around for quite some time is the Office Excel rendering extension. So if you have ever exported a report to Microsoft Excel from reporting services, you've used this component. It is a layout renderer, meaning that it tries its best to replicate the layout that you've defined in your report. It takes special care to do that. It generates Excel binaries, so it has very wide level of support on very many different versions of Office to reach the maximum amount of desktops. It includes a limited amount of formula support, so if you craft your expressions in your tables just the right way in 2005, the renderer will translate that into Excel formulas so that you can change the data and have those update on the client and actually use some of the calculation and exploration capabilities of Excel instead of relying on just server calculations. And we also does other Excel-like things like collapsible outlines. So you can take hundreds of rows and collapse them into some kind of summary detail kind of things. We also have a CSV rendering extension, which many people probably don't consider to be an Office integration piece at all, but in fact it is used quite widely by people who want to get their reports into Excel. So there's really two main scenarios why users choose to use a CSV rendering extension as opposed to the Excel one. First of all, maybe they're just not happy with kind of the output that Excel generates by reporting services. So you always have the option to use the CSV renderer to just take a dump of your data and to kind of use that tool to get the dump of data in Excel. And then once you have that data in Excel, you can do all sorts of Excel kinds of things on that data, such as lay a pivot table on top of it and add charts yourself. So it's a way to kind of circumvent some of the limitations of the Excel renderer and a different way to get your data into Office. And it's a data renderer, and I distinctly call that out from layout renderer because they are very different. So a layout renderer, like I said, the report will actually look like it did when you designed it, when you looked at it in preview, and like it will in all the other rendering extensions. A data renderer doesn't care about the way you laid it out. It doesn't care about your column widths, doesn't care about your colors, doesn't care about any of that stuff. It basically is just exports the processed data from the report server in either an XML or a CSV file. There's also an XML data rendering extension as well. So if you haven't used it before, there's a whole set of properties specifically targeted to data renderers that don't apply to layout renderers. And those properties all start with data element output, data element style, data element name. If you look at your table or your matrix object, you'll see those properties. And those properties in reporting services are what controls whether or not the data will be exported through the data renders. So it's an entirely different path altogether. And of course, once the report is deployed on the server brings a lot of capabilities for delivery and distribution. So by using a data-driven or a standard subscription, you can deliver reports through email and share them with people and open them up in Outlook and so forth. So for the SharePoint integration that came out in SQL Server 2005 Service Pack 2 and SharePoint Server 2007, this is kind of a general overview of the architecture. So in SQL Server 2005 Service Pack 2, you install Service Pack 2 and the WSS object model on the report server. This brings unique SharePoint security extensions and catalog management kind of components into the report server that kind of understand how to interact with SharePoint. On the SharePoint server side, you install the SQL Server Reporting Services add-in, again, that comes with 2005. And this installs the report viewer web part into your SharePoint library and also adds a bunch of report management UI. So it enables SharePoint to basically understand what a report is, what an RDL file really means to it, and provides the whole UI that you can use to do management and exploration. So, and you know, the SharePoint content database and the report server database kind of stay in sync. They communicate on the back end. And users really aren't even the wiser that a report server even exists. It's all very seamless with the SharePoint UI. So I'll show you a quick demo of the SharePoint integration right now. So first thing I'll show is this is just a regular SharePoint document library. Okay, and this server is completely integrated with SQL Server Reporting Services 2005. So these items here in the report library are reporting services reports. SharePoint has been enabled to understand what these mean. It's basically a new content type in the server, and a whole bunch of actions are associated with the RDL file type. And basically, when you click on it and when you do things with it, it interacts with the server, and you have a full reporting experience through SharePoint. So the first thing I'll show you is the document library setting. You can see that there's now a content type called report and report builder report. And these are special content types added by the SharePoint integration of reporting services. So the way you deploy reports, the way you do it through the UI is just through standard uploads. The same way you would upload any other document to a SharePoint document library. The same way you would upload Excel, the same way you would upload Word. If you upload an RDL, it automatically takes on being a reporting services report. You can also do things directly in document libraries, such as create a brand new report builder report. So if you are a report builder user and you want to open report builder and connect to a model and build a new report, you can do that, launch that application right here from SharePoint. And then when you're done designing your report in report builder, you save it, it'll go right back into the document library from which you launched it. So it's pretty seamless. There's no reason to go activate report builder through a different way or through a report manager or whatever. And as well, if you have a report in your document library that was created by report builder, one of the options you'll see in the drop-down, if it was edit in report builder. And that opens that report up right in report builder, so you can immediately go in and begin editing those reports. So you'll see here that there's a number of different kinds of functions you can do on the report, all provided through SharePoint. So there's a subscription UI, which I'll show you a little bit later, data sources, parameters, and processing options for setting up snapshots and so forth. So basically, anything you would have done before with Report Manager, you can all do integrated into a SharePoint UI. And it also shares, there's a certain degree of mapping between SharePoint security settings and report server security settings. So you use SharePoint security on the SharePoint side, and that passes through to the report server, and it's a seamless configuration experience. So when you click a report to run it, close this menu here. It actually contacts the report server on the back end, loads the report in this full screen report viewer control. So we'll pick a parameter value here. You see we have a redesigned parameter pane with values along the right-hand side. And if you've used the report viewer controls in any of your applications, or if you've used Report Manager, you're probably familiar with this kind of navigation. So you can do all sorts of things with the report. Refresh, paginate if there's pagination in your report, find, and zoom, for example. So when you're viewing a report in this kind of SharePoint environment here, all the features of the report that you've designed still continue to work. So if there was any expanding or collapsing or actions, they still will work. So for example, drill throughs, you click on the drill through, it pulls up the drill through report right in the kind of SharePoint viewer mode here. So you're not losing anything by going to the SharePoint. There's also a set of actions you can do here. So you can export, of course, to all the different formats that the server supports, print, open with Report Builder, and also subscribe. Now, we've also extended the subscription capabilities of the report server with SharePoint integration as well by adding a new delivery extension to the product. So here, you'll see a new option here, SharePoint Document Library. Previously, with non-SharePoint mode, you get Windows file share and email delivery mode. With SharePoint, you get the ability to deliver a document to a SharePoint doc library. So to configure a subscription in SharePoint, you first need to tell it what document library you want that subscription to go into. So in this case, we can open up the report library or the document library explorer, and we'll just put the document, when it gets delivered, we'll just put it into the same folder, the same document library where it exists. So we'll give it a name so we know what it is. Subscription. And you get to choose the format to which you want the report to be exported to. We'll keep that at Web Archive, so that's kind of an MHTML file, which is a self-contained file viewable in Internet Explorer with all the images embedded in it. Some various overwrite options, and then some scheduling options here. It gives you the ability to provide values for the parameters, so we'll do that here. And then we'll hit OK to finish up our configuration. So once the subscription is in the library, depending on how you've configured it to run either on a timed schedule or by some sort of other trigger, it will deliver the document to the SharePoint library. Now, we don't want to wait for the schedule here, so I have a kind of a script here that when I run this, it just kind of talks to the SQL Server agent, which handles all the subscription kind of scheduling for reporting services, and just immediately runs all the subscriptions that are in the database. So I'll run this, and then I'll go back to the document library, and we'll wait to see it appear. Looks like it's processing. I'll just keep reloading. And here it is. So the subscription is fired. It's pulled the data. It's executed the report on the server. And now it exists in the same SharePoint document library. And you can see that it's an MHTML file. And since SharePoint is aware of that particular file type, you can now do all sorts of MHTML things to that file, all the things you would do with any other files that you would normally. So if you view the report, it's essentially a snapshot of the report here in SharePoint. Another part of the SharePoint integration is the SharePoint Report Viewer web part. So it's a web part that you can use to basically add reporting services reports onto your overall SharePoint page. So you can mix and match report parts with different scorecards or different document viewers with Excel services and kind of seamlessly add reporting services onto your SharePoint sites. So here's an example of a report being viewed through the web part here. And I'll just go ahead and we'll add a new report part, and we'll view 2 reports on one SharePoint page. So we'll go to Edit Page, and we'll add a web part. And you'll see, and if we expand this here, we will look for SQL Server Reporting Services Report Viewer. This is the web part that comes with SQL Server Reporting Services in SP2 as part of the SharePoint integration. There's an old report viewer that customers often use to view reports through SharePoint. This is the new and improved one here. So we'll add this web part to the page. I'll maximize the window here. And then we'll go ahead and edit some properties here. So the first thing we need to do is open up the configuration screen and point this web part at the report that we want to see. And the report can exist in any SharePoint document library. So we'll go back to that document library that holds our AdventureWorks sample reports, and we'll pick this report here. And here's the fully qualified path to the report here. It could be in any doc library on this site, or it could also be in another SharePoint site if you wanted it to be as well. We'll hit OK. And then we'll hit OK. So once SharePoint gets around to acknowledging me, there we go. So in here, you have the same report viewing experience that you had in the full screen SharePoint view, and you have the ability to customize these things as well. So for example, in this mode, you see that the toolbar up here is off. You can have all sorts of customizability of the kind of chrome around the reports. So here's the parameters here, and here's the report. And once again, you can perform all the standard report actions from within the web part. So another cool thing you can do with this is you can connect the parameters of your web parts into filter web parts. So over here, you see that we have a SharePoint filter web part, which is used for picking dates. So when we change these dates here, we want both of these reports to also update. We'll pick those dates, and we'll send those parameters back off to the report server, and we'll get a new rendering of this report. So we'll go to Edit here, Connections, and Get Report Parameter From. So there's two parameters here that we're interested in, start date and end date. So we'll do start date. And once this loads, we will tell it which parameter from the report we want to link it to, and that'll be start date. So this here is the name of the filter item over here, and this is the name of the reporting services parameter from the web part. So we'll do that, and we'll do it one more time for end date. And the procedure is exactly the same. We'll just pick end date instead of start date, and we'll finish up. And then we'll apply the changes. And then we'll exit edit mode, and we'll see how it works. So now you see, if we change these values here, for example, we just put 6/1/2004 here, and apply the filters, these reports will reload, and the data will change because it's actually going back to the server and re-executing with the new parameters. So kind of a summary here of the kind of SharePoint integration points. Really, it's kind of a seamless integration with the SharePoint document libraries. So SharePoint is fully aware of an RDL. It knows what a report is, and lets you perform all sorts of tasks on those reports. Report management can also be done through SharePoint and secured through SharePoint. You can control who can author reports, who can upload reports, who can view reports, all using the SharePoint security model, which maps in the back end back through reporting services. Using reporting services, 2005 SP2 and SharePoint 2007 is a real kind of light-up experience for SharePoint Server. Really gives users a way to access the BI platform in SQL Server through a friendly front end like SharePoint. So now that stuff is kind of what I just talked about is stuff that's available today in 2005. You can begin using right away. So the next part of the talk will be kind of things that are definitely coming in SQL Server 2008. As far as Office integration goes. So the first thing you'll see here is that we are doing a Word rendering extension. We had Excel for a long time, and we're now adding Word. So it's a new addition to the suite of renderers, and basically you design your report, and you can export any report to Microsoft Word. There were two very important design goals that we had in mind when we designed this rendering extension. The first is that it be supported on a very wide number of desktops. Office 2007 is great, and we know it's great, but we hear time and time again from customers that they just haven't gotten around to deploying it yet, and they may not do so for quite some time. So our rendering extension exports to the 2003 era doc binary format, And the reason we did that is because we wanted report authors and administrators to be able to use the reports that we generate without having to think twice about, not having to think twice about it. So you know when you get the document out of reporting services as a doc file that it's fully supported from Word 2000 up through Word 2007, because Word 2007 has full backwards compatibility support for those old Word documents. There are a couple third parties that have Word rendering extensions, and they're actually pretty great. And the visual layout looks really good, but there's kind of a problem with them. And the reason that it's a problem is because the method of laying out the report items on the page that they use is it's a form of absolute positioning. So basically, all the items in the report down to the text box level in a table are kind of absolutely positioned as Word kind of text box controls. It makes the visual layout really great, but it really kind of messes up the ability to edit the document once you open it. So you open up a Word document and say you wanted to do something like put your cursor at the top, hit enter a few times, push everything down, and add a paragraph at the top. Very common scenario. You can't do that with the absolute positioning mode because the text, it doesn't flow like a real Word document. The text doesn't move like it's a real Word document. So rather than that, we went with a table-based layout. So the entire layout of the report, so every time we need to position one object with respect to another, it's all done through standard Word tables. And so there's a good deal of table nesting, and I'll show you in a second what those documents look like. But really, it gives you the maximum amount of editability. If you want to add a row to a table, you select the table, you right-click, and you go Insert Row, just like you would be familiar with doing it in a standard Word document that you created on your own. Another thing that's coming in SQL Server 2008 is what we're calling rich text functionality. So what this really is a text box on steroids. If you're familiar with text box today, you know that it's very difficult to do the kinds of things that you see in this kind of text box here. So this is just kind of a graphical mock-up of what we kind of expect it to look like in the future. So you can see inside this text box a couple things that I'll point out. First of all, you've got some line breaks in there, kind of different paragraphs in there, and which is difficult to do today. You also have the items that are kind of delimited by those angle quotes. Those are what we call placeholders. Those placeholders are bound to an expression coming from the database. So when it's evaluated at runtime, you can have a mix of static and dynamic text in your text box. So it's a way of doing kind of form letters and real estate notices and kind of document paragraph-based scenarios that were difficult, if not impossible, to do previously. Another thing that the rich text functionality kind of brings to you is the ability to render HTML that is stored in a database. So if you've got HTML markup strings with some text markup, paragraph alignment, font face, and style sheets, and so forth, if you have that in your database, you flip a switch on one of the placeholders here, and if HTML comes back from the database or from any source, really, it's just returning from the expression, it'll be shown in the report, marked up as you want it to be. And of course, full design time support with the new report designer, fully capable of kind of doing these paragraph-based things with a new fresh UI. So I will demo now the Word and rich text. So the scenario that I'll show you here is one where you have a lot of reports I see these days have kind of privacy statements or disclaimers at the bottom of them. And they're getting huger and huger every day. They're kind of multi-paragraph with multiple headings and so forth. So in this scenario, there's a table in the database that has a column that has kind of a long HTML string of text. And that text is to be inserted at the bottom of every report. So let's take a look at that. So we'll look at a report here. And unfortunately, as you'll notice, the images are not working on my machine. We did not cut images from the product. Don't worry. It's just an intermediate build. We wouldn't do that. And we'll pick Word from the list of export formats here, and we'll open it up. So the first thing I'll point out is, first of all, that we're in Word, and this is the Word rendering extension. And I've got the table grid lines turned on in Office 2007, so you can kind of see the layout here. So you can kind of see on these faint lines the kind of structure of the document and like how we actually get it laid out the way you want it to. So it's really easy to, for example, if I wanted to add another row to this table, just insert a row to the top, add another row, and you do it just like you do in regular Word. So here is a text box down here. So this entire thing here is one text box. And you can see how we have kind of multiple paragraphs and different headings in there and mixed formatting. So this is an example of what the rich text brings to you. So say we want to change the formatting or the text of this particular disclaimer. So all we need to do is go here. So I've got a table in the database here that I created that has a disclaimer in it. I'll open up the table here. And presumably you wouldn't be editing the table yourself directly through the Management Studio, but this is how I'll do it for the demo. And once it opens, we'll see the HTML string in the column, and we'll make some changes, and then we'll re-render the report, and we'll see how it's changed. So here we have kind of the entire couple paragraphs here within a span tag. So we want to change the font from Arial to use kind of the more modern Calibri font. And we'll change the size to 8 points, because it really kind of spills over onto 2 pages, and we want to make it smaller. So that looks correct. You can close that now. Close the document, and we'll refresh the report from within Report Manager. And then when we render it back to Word, we will see that the font changes have taken effect. So I'm showing you this in Word as part of the Word demo as well. But we are also, there's going to be full support for rich text in all of the rendering extensions that we have. So, HTML, PDF, all of that. Some of them have, some of the export formats, such as Excel, have kind of limited support. There's only a certain amount of kinds of paragraph formatting things you can put inside of a single Excel cell. So the support in all the renderers may not work in all the formats, but we intend to make it work for all the extensions. So here you can see, let me turn off these grid lines. Here you can see that the text has been changed appropriately to the right size here. So we think people have been asking us for HTML support for a very long time, and we think it's going to make changing content, lots of content in reports, very easy. So for those of you who are interested in kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of what rich text really is, if any of you are familiar with kind of RDL, which is the XML-based report kind of definition language, it describes everything about the report, from the data sources to the connections to the data sets, parameters, interactivity, and all the visual layout as well. Previously, there was a text box object defined by a text box element, and there was a value property and a style property of that text box. And those two properties lived up at the text box level. So really, you were constrained to defining a value, one value for a text box, and one style for a text box. So you can only have very sparsely formatted text boxes. Here's kind of a snippet. I hope you can see that. I apologize if you can't, of what rich text RDL might look like. So you'll see here that there's a paragraph element and then a text runs element. So now, instead of just having a value and just having a style, the text box now contains a collection of paragraphs. Those paragraphs, in turn, contain collections of text runs. And so the box on the bottom right shows the text that this RDL is meant to represent. So you can see that the text of like formatting is kind of broken up into different runs. And you can apply different styles and formatting to each of those runs. So for example, the due date is bound to a field, the due date here. And we want to format that with the D letter, which is date formatting. Later on, there's some string here called overdue balance, which is bold. And we've added the font weight element to that text as well. So just kind of a glimpse for anyone who may be interested in kind of the structural aspects of rich text for really what that is in the back end. And I'm happy to talk in more detail about this if anybody has any questions later on. So we hear time and time again that information workers they want to be able to do reporting, and developers and administrators want information workers to be able to do reporting because they don't want to be bugged every time the information worker wants a word changed to bold, or they want to change their data layout a little bit. Another thing that is very common is people want really good, really awesome output to Excel or Word. If you're going to do a report that's a form letter, or you're going to do a report that is a purchase order, you know you want it in Word, so let's get really good Word output. So to help satisfy these two very common needs, Microsoft acquired technology called Office Writer from a company called Soft Artisans. So in essence, Office Writer is Office-based report authoring. So your entire authoring experience takes place in Excel and Word. And there's two primary benefits to using Office Writer. Number one, the report design experience can be done by anybody who is familiar with Excel or Word, because most, if not all, really most of the design experience is done using standard Word and Excel techniques. If you know how to make a word bold in Word and Excel, you know how to do it with Office Writer, because it uses the exact same dialogues and the exact same techniques. So Office Writer is a couple special add-ins for Word and Excel, and I'll show you that in a second. So basically, there's a new toolbar item that appears in the toolbar or in the ribbon, depending on which version you're using, that has functions for connecting to the report server and creating data sets and dropping data fields. Office Writer uses the same file formats, so it uses the XLS binary format and the document format, same as our rendering extensions, so you can be assured that the output is going to be compatible on a wide number of desktops. So that goes for both the types of documents that it generates, as well as the plugins actually for doing the authoring. So full fidelity Word and Excel output. It's pure, it's 100% WYSIWYG. So whatever you put into the Word or Excel document, you can be sure that it will be delivered in your report. And I'll explain exactly how that works in a little bit. And it supports all Excel and Word features. So there's a number of really key scenarios that the use of Office Writer can really enable. So it's creating, I'm sorry, yes? It is available for 2005 from Soft Artisans. I'll get to that a little bit later, but if you want it today, it is available today. And we're going to be making enhancements to it and integrating it in the future. But I'll talk about that at the end. Good question, though. Thank you. So it's really the creation of document-centric reports that's been kind of a stumbling block for people using reporting services in the past. Office Writer, since the design tool is Excel and is Word, it really lets you do kinds of things that were difficult to do in the past. You get rich Excel reports, easy editing by end users, and you also get the ability to separate kind of data and layout. So in one of the scenarios I'll be showing in the demo, you can, as an administrator or as kind of a database person, you can define the data sets in an RDL file, give that file to a user, and they then can edit the report in Excel and Word, and they never have to even go to the data source or look at the tables or view the models or anything like that. So I'll show now an example of Office Writer reporting in Excel. So I'll close this and close this. And so in this scenario, I will actually be creating a data set. So I'm starting pretty much entirely from scratch. I need to create the connections, create the data sources, and build the report, and then publish it. So the first thing you'll notice is once Excel loads up, there's going to be a brand new tab up here called Reporting. So what I'm showing you today, the kind of addition, the version of the software that I'm showing you today is modifications we've made to it in kind of a prototype kind of way since we've got it from Soft Artisans. So most of the basic functions that you see today, you can actually do today if you purchase the product from Soft Artisans. But there are a few things that we've added to it since then that you, for example, wouldn't be able to do. So one example is just this Office 12 look and feel. It's fully supported in Office 12 if you buy it today, but we've built a custom ribbon. So there's just there's going to be a few differences between what you see here today and what you can do today if you actually purchase it today. This is more like what it will look like in the future when we integrate it with reporting services. So here is the Office Writer toolbar here. And you've got a number of different buttons for doing a number of different report-related tasks. So this one here lets you open up RDL files both from the report server and also from the file system. You can save reports, publish them, preview them. These are data set functions that you're probably familiar with for adding, removing data sets, and adding fields to your report as well. This section here called Server Formulas is basically lets you create expressions that are evaluated on the server by reporting services. So when you're in Excel, you can build in lots of Excel formulas that get calculated on the client once Excel opens up the processed report, or you can add formulas that were processed on the server. I'll show you examples of all of these. So today, in its current incarnation, the query design tool that we use is it's the MS Query tool, which in a word is old, and in another couple of words is not loved. We're going to be changing that in the future. The query design experience, rest assured, will get a lot better. So the general process today for creating a data set is first give it a name. and then we'll select a connection. So I've already defined a connection to the AdventureWorks database. The connections that are defined are listed here, and I'll hit OK. So once it makes a connection, it loads up MS Query, and you get a list of tables and views in your database, and you can build your relational query using this tool. So let's see here. We'll make a query that has two tables here. We'll look under the sales schema, and we'll add a sales territory and sales order header. So it'll be a simple query that just returns a couple fields. We'll pick the territory name from the sales territory table and the total due field from the sales order header table. So let's also add a parameter to the report here. So we'll do add criteria. So we'll filter these on the server, on the database side, by year. So you can pass in a parameter 2000, 2001, and get back the data. So the expression we want to evaluate against is year, sales order header, order date. And the syntax for creating parameters in this case is to put them inside of brackets. So we'll call it year param, just like that. And it prompts, and we'll test it out, 2002. And we'll try it again, 2003, just to make sure the data is changing. So the data is changing, so the parameter works. So furthermore, we will add some aggregation to this column here. So we'll make it a sum of all the values here. And we'll sort it descending. So we kind of have a yearly view of how all the territories are performing sales-wise. When we're done with our query definition, we can return to the Office Writer Designer. And I'll point out now that the query that we just created now appears in this dropdown, and the fields that are returned from that query appear here. So beyond that, pretty much anything you do in the report is just using regular Excel. So let's start building up a report the regular way you would do it in Excel. So first we'll add a title. We'll just do territory sales. And this is going to be our header, so we want it to be a little bit larger and stand out a little bit. We'll give it a color. Blue. And so let's add the headers for our data here. So we know we have sales territories, and we have the total sales for that territory. So let's put some data in there so we can preview what our data will look like. So we have North 1, South 2, for example. We'll make this underlined and bold. And now let's put a chart on top of this. So we'll select the data, and we'll throw a pie chart on there. So this is kind of a preview of what our data is going to look like. Change the size a little bit and move it over. So that looks good. So now we can kind of remove the dummy data here and replace this with the fields that we've defined in our data set. And you do that by selecting a cell and clicking it to drop in these markers here. So this kind of syntax that you see in Excel, the percent equals, we typically call them data markers. And that's just a signal to, on the server when we're processing this document, look for this data set and this field and cram the data in there right where you see it. So the chart looks a little funny with those data markers in there, but when it gets processed on the server, it will look how you expect it to look. We'll open this a little bit. So like I said before, anything you can put into the Office document, you can make part of your report. So let's add some Excel formulas. We'll add a sum to the bottom here. And we'll align it, make it bold. And we want to sum all of these values that come back. So this is a multi-row record set. We want to kind of sum up all these values. So we'll define a formula like this. D5 to D5. So it points to itself right now, but when it gets processed with data on the server, the Office Writer rendering extensions on the server will look at that formula and update it so that it fits, it updates for every row of data that comes back from the data set. And since we know these are going to be currency values, we can format them as currency. And so we'll go to the Excel format dialog here and format them like that. Conditional formatting is also very common. So if it's greater than 4 million, we'll make it green. And if it's less than 3 million, we'll make it red. Okay? And then you can add other various Excel objects to the report as well. For example, I'll just add a line down here and make like a little footer section. I can add real Excel headers and footers too. And now I'll take a look here at this here. So The server formulas tab here lets you define, basically bind expressions that are evaluated on the server to data markers. So we want to show what parameter, what year the user selected when they ran the report. So we'll go to year and build the expression here. So you can type any kind of text in here as long as it's a valid reporting services parameter. So we'll hit OK. And we will insert that formula here. And we'll make it the same color. So once we're done with our report here, we can go back to the Office Writer tab, and we can preview it. So we can send it back up to the server. First, we'll save a copy. It generates an RDL file. So this I'm getting because I'm editing the document in Office 2007, and Office Writer actually works with the 2003 format. So this is a warning that you get when you try to save a 2007 document into a 2003 format. And it's warning of minor loss of fidelity. This is an Office dialog. There's nothing here that will change the look of our report at all. So here is kind of a tree view of our SharePoint document library. Here's a list of reports here, and we can publish the reports directly up to the SharePoint document library from within Excel. And we'll just call it, we'll call it territory sales. And hit OK. Publish successful. Now it will prompt you for the parameter here, and we'll just change it to 2002. And it'll submit the parameter and retrieve the report. And you can see that the report is, when processed, looks exactly like it did in Excel. So the formula was evaluated on the server and placed into the sheet. This is a real Excel chart. So it's still connected to the data, unlike the reporting services charts of today. So if you change it, it will actually update. Conditional formatting has taken effect. The formula has updated for all the rows. And you have a true WYSIWYG experience from within Excel. So using this technique in Excel, you can really get a lot more out of Excel through reporting services. And this tool, Office Writer, generates reports as RDL files, and it publishes them to the server the same way that any other RDL files are published to the server, which means once it's on the server, you can take advantage of all the goodness that the report server brings to you with security and delivery and export. So I can now go back to that document library and see that my report is now there. And since the report's there, I can do all this regular report things with it. So just kind of emphasizing that it's a regular old report. You can take advantage of all the features of the server. And there it is. So because you can use anything in Excel in the report, there's a lot of different things you can do in Excel that you can't do today. So for example, pivot tables are one of them. If in the course of building your template, you add a pivot table to your report and you publish it to the server, you can get pivot tables in your reporting services reports. And I'll show you an example of one of those that I already have pre-designed. So here's an example of a company sales report. And this is the regular AdventureWorks company sales report that kind of looks like this, designed in Report Designer. And when you look here, you'll see Office Writer rendering extensions. So this particular RDL has both the standard RDL-based layout in it, the layout of the report defined in XML, and it also has the Office Writer definition stored in it as well. So when you use non-Office Writer rendering extensions to render this report, it will read the XML. So if you export to PDF or TIFF or CSV or whatever, you'll get this representation. If you use the Excel for reports designed by Office Writer, we'll use the Office Writer definition, and you'll get all the goodness of Excel that you put into it when designing it. So let's take a look at that. So we'll save it to the desktop and open it. So once it opens, we'll see that it opens up to a page with a pivot table in it. OK, so it was created in an earlier beta version, so we'll hit OK. So here's the pivot table. And if you look on this sheet here, this is kind of a dump of data. So Office Writer basically, on the server, opened up the Excel file, dumped the data from the data set into this sheet here. And when we refresh the pivot table, you get a full pivot table with all the data coming from reporting services. And this is a real pivot table that you can move around and kind of manipulate just how you're usually familiar with doing it. So the ability to get pivot tables out of reporting services reports is kind of a big plus. In addition to pivot tables, you can also put macro code into your reports to give to kind of improve the interactive experience of them as well. So here's an example of a report that has some VBA code in it that runs once it's opened. And this is a modified version of the product line sales report. And when I open it to Excel, we'll do the same thing we did before. We'll get the document back, and we'll save it onto the desktop. And then when we open it, now this has some unsigned macros in it, so we're going to get a security warning. But once we enable them, then here's a report here. And so we've added a button here that calls a bunch of macro code that we've written custom in this report. So this basically programmatically generates a pivot table and represents that data kind of in a different way. So we click this, and now we see that the VBA code has created this pivot table, linked it up with the data, and so it's an example of the kinds of things you can do with reports when you use Office Writer. Basically, anything you can do in VBA, you can bring to reporting services. Yes, you can. Yep. So in sum, authoring in Excel really brings you the ability to support all Excel features. And some of the most interesting ones to me are pivot tables, formulas, and real charts that update when you change your data. So you can twiddle around with the data in Excel like people often like to do, and everything maintains its connections through formulas. And again, most report tasks are done through standard dialogues. So there's no need to learn a bunch of new techniques. There's no need to learn about a brand new toolbar for doing formatting, because you've been doing formatting in Excel for years. You can continue to do it the same way. So how does Office Writer really work in the back end? So I mentioned that there is an Office Writer definition stored in the RDL file. So the way this works is that you design the Office in Excel and Word, and when you generate the report using the toolbar in Office, it takes the actual document or XLS file, serializes it, and stores it inside of the RDL file. So that's what this middle graphic here represents. It's kind of an RDL file with an attached Word document or an attached Excel document. On the server side, when you render these documents with the attachments with the Office Writer renderers, the Office Writer renderers know to go in and look for that attachment, understands the format of the document, executes the data sets, merges it with data, and then sends it out. So here's kind of a brief look at Office Writer RDL. So here you see this is where the document file is actually stored. So it's encoded as a base 64 string, and it's crammed into the RDL file and in the custom section today. And like I said before, when you render it with Office Writer looks at this custom section, deserializes the file, and since Office Writer understands the file on the server, you get the data merged with the document. So this means you can have multiple layouts in one RDL file. And here's kind of what I mean by that. So this highlighted section here represents the standard RDL layout. If you design a report with Report Designer or Report Builder or other standard tools, the entire layout of the report is defined in this XML. And the reporting services out-of-the-box rendering extensions, the ones you see there, the ones that you've been using for years, understand that kind of XML layout in a sense. The Office Writer rendering extensions don't look at this other section. They don't look at the body section. It just looks at the custom section here, grabs the document, and then processes it. So what that means is when you start from scratch designing a report in Excel or Word, you don't have any of this body layout. So if you start from nothing and you just add Excel, we kind of generate kind of a placeholder RDL. So if you look at that file, you know what, let me just show you. So I'll go back here to the territory sales Excel sheet we just did. So when I look at this, when you load it in the SharePoint viewer, it's viewing the HTML representation of it. So this is what our placeholder text looks like right now. And this just basically says, you've created this report in Excel. There's no other RDL layout that I can understand, that the renderer understands. So you need to export it with the Office Writer extensions. And so that's how this looks here. But yet when we export it with Excel, you'll get the same output that we saw when we previewed it in the application. So that means you can have multiple layouts within one RDL file. So just like we have the add-ins for Word, just like we had them for Excel, we also have them for Word as well. So I'll show you a couple Word demos now. So the first one I'll show you is kind of a form letter scenario. So I will open up Word. and I'll create a form letter with this tool. So in this scenario, I already have an RDL file on the server. So presumably somebody who knows the database has created this RDL file and has predefined data sets and connections in there for me. So there's already something that exists on the server. So I'll open it up. And it's called form letters here. When I open that, the query here that was defined in the RDL file is populated in this dropdown here. So it's already predefined. I don't have to go back to the database now and define my own query. I just get a list of fields here. So now, like in Excel, the entire authoring process is done through Word. So I can add kinds of pictures or anything I want to my document. So I'll add a picture real quick and create a standard form letter here. Usually you have the address, name and address kind of at the top. I should have put zip code in there too, but I didn't. So, finish typing your letter. Dear customer, you have won. It's good news. Sincerely, which works. Okay, so since it's a form letter, we want to generate documents for a number of different recipients. So we want to generate one of these documents per page. So we want one big Word doc with each page being its own form letter here. So there's a way you can do that. In the Word design tool, there's this concept of a query range. So basically, if you have a multiple row record set, you define a range of the document for that record set. For every row of data, you'll get whatever is defined inside that range repeated. So and you can put any part of the document inside of that repeat block, so it's actually very powerful. So for example, you can do dynamically growing Word tables or dynamic bulleted or numbered lists, or in this case, what I'll show you is also including a page break in there as well. So we'll insert a page break here, and then we'll select the document up to the page break. Just like that. So once we've selected it, that's what we want repeated for every row of data that's coming back from the data set. And we hit the query range button, and we say, yes, we want this form letter addresses query to apply to the section of the document that I have selected right now. And I hit OK. Now you'll see that the section is marked off by Word bookmarks, by these little brackets here. Now, anything inside that bookmark will be repeated once for every row of data. So let's take a look at it. And we'll just call it form letters. Publish it to the same SharePoint doc library. There's a parameter here. So we've got a list of valid values, and we'll pick Kentucky. In the current version, yes, that will be changed. There's an execution endpoint that we could be using, but yeah. And here's the report. So when we look at it in print preview, there's one page for every recipient. So if somebody came up to the booth yesterday and said they were having a hell of a time doing form letters, and I knew that they would be pretty happy with this particular tool here. So let me show you another example. So using this tool, it's also quite simple to retrofit your existing documents to reporting services reports. So say, for example, I have a purchase order document here that my company's been using forever, and we just kind of want to make this document into a reporting services report. First, I'll turn these things off. So I've got all the stuff here, and we want to make it reporting services. So we'll copy the content here, and we'll open up a new instance of Word. And again, like before, I have an RDL file published on the server that has the queries defined for my purchase order already up there. So when I open it, it's called purchase order query here. When I open it, here's two data sets that I'm going to use for building my purchase order. So I'll go ahead and paste my content in here. And now I'll just go add data fields. So the order header query here has things that appear only once in the report. So I can add name, address line 1, city, state, province code, and finally postal code. And then there's a few other things that appear only once as well. So for example, subtotal, sales tax here, shipping, and the total. So I'm just dropping these fields right in here. So now there's the order detail query, which has kind of the detail level stuff in the report, and we want to put that in the table here. So we've got order quantity here, unit ID, description, which is name, unit price, and finally line total. So once again, we want to define this table row as a repeat block. So we'll select it, click the query range button, and say, yes, we want this selection to repeat once for every row in the order detail query. And we'll hit OK. And so now you see the bookmarks there, so it will repeat. And let's add order number. OK. So these items here that OfficeWriter uses are standard Word merge fields. So if you've ever done a mail merge in Word, you might be familiar with this kind of syntax. So if you want to add extra formatting to the Word document, to any of the data coming back in the merge fields, if you know merge field formatting codes, you can type them right in here. So this is something that we plan on making on streamlining a lot in the future. Right now, you need to kind of know what the merge field formatting codes are. And that's what they look like here. I think that's right anyway. So this will basically just take the raw data from coming back in the field and format it like it's currency, hopefully. Another cool thing you can do, because we're using Word, is you can insert breaks into the document as well. So let's attach an envelope to this report here. We want to print out both the purchase order itself, then we want an envelope that we'll print out that we can stuff the envelope, and then mail it out as well. So to do that, we need to add a section because we want to change the size of the page for the envelope, obviously. So we'll add a next page section break here. And we'll go to size. We'll pick a number 10 envelope. We will change the orientation to landscape. And so now we have the envelope here and the purchase order up here. And we can go ahead and add the same data fields here. So we'll go down a little bit and move it over to the center. You can put your return address there if you'd like. And then we'll drop the same fields in here. City, state, province code, and postal code. We'll move it back a little bit. There we go. So there's our envelope and our purchase order. So let's publish that back up to the server, and we'll see what it looks like. Purchase order and envelope. So there's a parameter defined in there. It prompts the parameter. We'll just take the default for now. And let me zoom out a little bit here. So here's the report. All of the fields here were replaced with data. The table has grown. The merge field, the formatting here actually did work, which is good. You see the values there. And here's our envelope. So a number of different things you can do that are difficult to do today with reporting services. And once again, because this is a real report, you can take advantage of all of the stuff on the server as well. Sir, question? If you have that, then you can, sure, you can publish it to the server and do a data-driven subscription. So I'll actually show an example of that. So this, in combination with kind of the functionality on the server, can satisfy that pretty well. So I'll actually just go right into that as well. Let's see here. So if you've used SharePoint mode, you know that there's currently no UI for creating data-driven subscriptions in SharePoint mode. So I'm going to do all this back in 2005. That is something that we're working on for the SharePoint integration, which will come in the 2008 timeframe. So here is the same purchase order, although without the envelope, that was created with OfficeWriter. So to create a data-driven subscription, click this here. And we'll do email delivery. Email subscription. And we'll email it to our local SMTP server that I have running right here. So this is where you specify kind of the data source for the subscription. When the data-driven subscription runs, where's it going to get the data that it needs to process all of it? So, for example, we need to retrieve email addresses, and we need to retrieve purchase orders numbers because we need to pass that onto the report. So that all also comes from the AdventureWorks database. And so I have a query pre-made here, right here. So this query, you'll see, queries the AdventureWorks database, and it only brings back the top 25 just for demonstration purposes, but it gets a list of sales order numbers and the contact email address for the person who created that, who initiated the purchase order with the company. So we'll copy that and we'll put it into the window here and validate it against the data source. And it looks good. So here is where we specify kind of different values for the email subscription. So for example, we know we want it to go to a different email recipient for each order. So we'll take the email address to value from the email address field coming back from that query I just created. We'll leave the CC and the BCC values clear, leave the report reply to value clear. We do want to include the report, and we want to include the report in the Word doc designed by Office Writer format. So we want that document attached to the emails when they go out. Priority with normal, subject we can stay as it is, and we'll put a comment in the email. Thank you for your order. And then here's where we get to specify what value we want passed on to the documents as parameters. So the report, the purchase order report, has a sales order number parameter. So we'll pick the sales order number, also coming from that same data set that I just defined. And we'll create a schedule, but we're not going to use the schedule just for time constraints. So once that's created, I can call my little script over here to fire off that report. And what's actually happening here is that I have a local SMTP server running on my machine. The report server is sending the email out through the SMTP service, and you should see 25 different emails appear in this queue here, processed and ready to go. And we can open one of those up and take a look at it and see how it works. Should be just a second. So the way the SMTP server works, you deliver them to a pickup directory, and the server picks them up from the pickup and throws them into this queue folder, waiting for some other service to do something with them. So here are 25 documents generated through that report here. So if I open up one of these, I can use my favorite email viewer, Outlook Express, and you see this is the report, and each of them are sent out to whoever email address for the person who did the order, and has a unique purchase order document attached to it as well. So by combining kind of the document generation capabilities of Office Writer with the subscription capability of the server, you really get the ability to have reporting services pump out lots and lots of documents and to distribute them appropriately. You can do that if you use the web archive version, yes. For the Word rendering extensions, it attaches it. Web Archive puts it inline. So that is something where you think we might look at in the future because you can actually put Word into reports. So not right now, though. So kind of a summary of authoring in Word is that it kind of enables new classes of document-based reports. And just like Excel, it uses standard Word techniques for doing the layout. This is kind of the delivery scenario I just talked to you about. So because reports are on the server, you can deliver them with subscriptions, secure them, and deliver them just the way you would regular reports. And like I showed you, you can use data-driven subscriptions to pump out large numbers of Excel and Word documents. And I already showed you this demo. So now for the roadmap. So Microsoft did purchase the product from Soft Artisans. Microsoft owns the product. In the SQL Server 2005 timeframe, Soft Artisans continues to sell it. So they have an edition for it that works in Reporting Services 2000 and 2005. If you need it for that edition of SQL Server, go to them, and they'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. We plan on integrating this functionality in the future version of Reporting Services. So we expect full integration. We expect massive UI improvements, so a new Office 2007 look and feel, an enhanced query design experience, basically not using MS Query, a lot of different UI kinds of enhancements. Support for report builder models, so users can kind of create semantic queries the way they're familiar with doing it in Report Builder, and a couple other features as well, maybe export to other formats, and maybe some server workflow functions from the toolbar as well. So that's what we're looking at today. You don't today. I don't know what the licensing is going to be like in the future. The question was, do you need client licenses to run the designer? I can tell you from Soft Artisans, the way they sell it today, you do not. It's licensed on a server basis, and the client tool is unlimited. I do not know the details about what the licensing will be in the future. Sir?
Yes, I had a couple of questions about SharePoint integration. When you integrate report server instance with SharePoint, does that affect your ability to use external applications or even report service, web service API?
No, it does not. It doesn't. The API, it changes a little bit, so you can't make the same calls. If you have stuff built into your application, you'll probably need to change it a little bit and recompile it. Is there? Yeah, okay, so you'll find it in books online. So I'm sorry, the question was, if you're calling the reporting services APIs and then you put your report server into SharePoint mode, what changes? And the answer was a little bit of the API changes, but it's fully documented. But it's functionally, none of the functionality has changed.
And as a follow-on to that, I understand that you can't use report manager, which is great, but I know my admins do sometimes use management console or the actual report service integration tool.
Mm-hmm.
Does that change?
Brian, do you know the answer to that? Okay. So the answer was the config tool will work. Management Studio does not. So the question was, if you're in SharePoint mode, how do you continue, if you don't want to manage your reports through SharePoint, what's the way for admins to manage reports? So the config tool is the way to go. Sure. Just remember everybody to please fill out an evaluation for the session. Sir? That's correct. That is something we're looking at for the future, yes. We've got a couple of requests for it. The question was, are we going to support XPS format, the XML paper specification? And that's something we're considering, yes. Uh-huh. Sure. So the question with respect to rich text functionality is, are we going to support rich text format strings in addition to HTML format strings? The answer initially is no. It's going to be HTML. We have a number of requests for RTF, so that may come sometime in the future, but initially just HTML. Sir? I beg your pardon? Mm-hmm. So the question is data-driven subscription functionality going to be moved into standard edition because it's just in enterprise today? Brian, do you know? I'm not. No, it's no plans to change that. Sir? Uh-huh. Yep. Right. Yeah, that's actually a well-known problem, and that has to do with the fact that when you hide columns in the body size doesn't actually change. That'll be addressed in the next version. So when you hide a column, the body will actually, when you hide a column, it'll take the space with it, and the body will shrink, just the way that rectangles behave today. With respect to the new designer, the new design tool, Brian, tomorrow's session. Advanced report design, it's the repeat of 306 is tomorrow, and Brian's going to show a little bit of the new report design tool during that session. Good question. Afternoon. Sir? We'll get the time for you. That I don't know. Brian, do you? Okay. Yeah, 1 o'clock tomorrow is actually a session about report design, other report design tools in the next edition. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. The answer is yes, but more detail tomorrow. Sir? So the question was, how do RDLCs work in SharePoint mode? So RDLCs are designed for processing in the report viewer controls in local mode. So RDLCs don't really make sense in SharePoint mode, because when you execute a report on SharePoint, it's actually going to the server and executing the report in server mode. So there's a few things you can do to change an RDLC file into an RDL file. So if you have a local report and you want to change it into a server report, you make some modifications to the RDL, change the file extension, and then you can turn it into a server report if you wanted to. The question about RDLCs in the Office Writer, that is actually a good question. We have not really considered that. Sir? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So interesting. So kind of passing parameters from one report to another. You can do that. I know you can do the drill through stuff, which will actually load in the same window. But I don't know about the. Yeah. So I guess the answer is no at this point.